Shalom, this is Daniel Jester coming to you from Jerusalem, from Restoration from Zion Ministries of Tikkun Global. Please look us up on the website, sign up for our newsletter, become connected to our ministries. Please look at our list of books which address some of these issues, especially the book Jewish Roots and the book Social Justice, which addresses some of these issues. That book, Social Justice, is based a bit on what I'm going to share now. In the Torah, we now have a lot of stipulations that are not particularly connected to religious stipulations like the feasts, but stipulations that are brilliant in terms of providing the most humane law code in the history of the world to that date. And it's quite absolutely amazing. And so you will find that in these particular stipulations from Exodus chapter 21 to 23, and you just have to read them, so many of them are amazingly applicable to civil society. And despite negative things that were said about the Torah in the history of the church, in the history of Western culture, the Torah did guide the creation of Western law. As they looked at these and they confirmed them, they weren't systematic about it, but you can see the extraordinary regard for human beings created in the image of God. And the fact that people are created in the image of God is what drives how we respond to crime and punishment and to how we're to treat people. So, for example, in the Torah, in Exodus 21, verse 12, and we don't have time to go over a lot of these, like we said, whoever strikes a man so that he dies must surely be put to death. But if he did not hunt him down and it was accidental, there's a place to flee so that he doesn't get put to death and he's able to hide until the high priest dies, which is almost like an atonement for accidental death. If somebody, verse 16, steals a person and sells him, then that's the death penalty. We find that if a person strikes another person and injures him so that he loses work, you have to compensate him. In those days, they were allowed to have slaves for 6 years because a person would come into debt. They would get out of debt by becoming an indentured slave. It's not racial slavery or anything like that. But if the slave is mistreated, he goes free. And all is paid off. You have laws here about taking care of animals, so that if an animal is known to gore people and you don't keep that animal controlled, you're responsible for it. You have the commandment in Deuteronomy to build a fence around your roof, which means because people went up on the roof and lived on it. So there are laws having to do with protecting people, not leaving a pit so that people can fall into it, building a fence around your roof because the roof is like a porch. It's a flat roof where people go up, and if people fall off and get injured, that would be terrible, so you got to build a fence on it. What would be the application of that today? Well, to shovel your walk if you're in a northern climate with snow, to see that people don't slip on the sidewalk and get hurt. So that commandment is, we understand the principle to take reasonable steps to guard the safety of your neighbors, because the Torah commands us in Leviticus chapter 19 to love your neighbor as yourself. And it also commands you to help your enemy if he falls under his ox, to go and help your enemy, so that there's even an acting kindly toward your enemy here in Deuteronomy. A lot of people don't even know that. They think that the treatment of the enemy well is something that only came from the teaching of Yeshua. We also find standards for being able to defend yourself and your property. If you are in danger and the thief is killed, you're free. But if you could have prevented the thief without killing him and it was daylight, then you get in trouble for killing the thief. I mean, it's just amazing how these laws are so similar to some of the things that developed in Western culture that were not in other cultures to the same extent. Of course, there are laws here against sorcery and witchcraft that they weren't to permit them to live. Now, when you look at all of these stipulations, here's one of the amazing things that you find. Almost all violations of the law are punished by making restitution. If you steal, you have to return it sometimes double, sometimes 4 times. We're not going to get into the details of that. But the person never goes to jail. He makes restitution and pays a penalty. So almost all violations of the law are worked out by restoring and making whole the person who is violated, except those violations that are capital violations which require death. So there's no prison system in the Torah. The person is reformed, hence that was the meaning of the term penitentiary. They do penance and that they are reformed. They are reformed on the basis of making restitution under community oversight. Nobody is given the penalty of prison, but capital crimes like murder, rape, adultery, witchcraft, that's the death penalty. But just think, for all of those people that don't do capital crimes, how much more humane the Torah is in how it treats those people. Then we find as well extraordinary standards for the judges. The Torah precludes the idea of trial by ordeal. You might have read about trial by ordeal. You know, here's the witch, right? You're going to prove whether or not this person's a witch. So you're going to put them under the water on a dunking chair. And if they survive that, it proves they're a witch, and then they have to be burned to death. But if they don't survive it, they weren't a witch. Now, you might laugh, but that really was one of the tests. So they put the person to death who's innocent. I mean, I don't know how that worked. But trials by ordeal in the Middle Ages, that's not allowed. In the Torah, especially capital offenses, we read in Deuteronomy 1, Deuteronomy 17, you have to have honest judges that don't take a bribe, and penalties have to be through the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. That is the ultimate standard, which comes forth in the New Covenant in Matthew 18 for church discipline, which is lifted right out of Deuteronomy. There you see the applicability of the Torah again. So when you study the laws of the Torah for penalties and crimes and violations, it's just an amazing compendium of good government and good law and good standards in terms of avoiding bribery and honest judges and witnesses and all of those things. This comes out of the Torah. And without the Torah, we don't have all these standards in our culture.